two, one. We are now live on Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live, Rick.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for putting me on the very first show.
And Rick, thanks a lot for agreeing to do this. Um, let's just see if we're actually on there. I'm going to look on the site and refresh it. It says we're live.
Cool.
Yeah, it is showing on there, so I think we're good. All right. Well, hey, welcome everybody to the show. If you're just joining us, Rick and I were having about 20 minutes of the preview show called "Old Guys Baffled by Technology." Kind of learning how to use this stuff. We had a dry run last week, which how successful it was. But thanks again for agreeing to do this, Rick.
It's fun to talk to you always.
I wanted to a couple of things I wanted to get on the radar here. First of all, let me bring up my notes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brendan Baylod, and this is the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. Rick and I are old shipwreck groupies from the Great Lakes for years past. And I got the idea to do this as a social media group because there wasn't a lot out there for people who are really into Great Lakes shipwrecks. There's a lot of their maritime history groups. And I didn't realize this was going to fill a niche. I started it with about, I don't know, I was thinking I was going to give like 20 or 30 of my best kind of shipwreck geek buddies on there. Tonight, about 5 minutes ago, we got group member number 700. And that is just after 3 months, 2 months. So thank you, everybody, for joining this. It's really been amazing. And I want to thank people because it's everybody coming together as a community that really makes this happen. It's the posts, the really neat comment from people. I've seen stuff that people have shared that's just been amazing, really, things that we wouldn't have, otherwise seen. So thanks so much. It's been just a really, really great experience to bring the Great Lakes kind of maritime history and shipwreck community together like this in one place. And one of the ideas I had, I thought, well, geez, we got so many people, and why not do a live interview show and give a chance for the people who are in our community to share what they're up to. And so that's kind of what this is. This is a chance, and this is our first inaugural show. So I invited my good friend Rick Mixter to come, and so we're going to do this every few weeks. We're going to have a live guest, and we're going to do an hour-long show. We're going to interview the person. We're going to take your questions. So I want you to know I can see your comments on the right side of the screen. We're going to do the interview part first. We'll take the comments at the end, or the questions at the end. So that is the show. My guest is Rick Mixter. And for those of you, if there's anybody out there that doesn't know Rick, Rick has been sort of one of our gurus in the Great Lakes shipwreck research, production, diving community for, heck, as long as I can remember. Rick has got a lot of cool things that he's done, and I'm not going to go into all the detail because a lot of it's in his bio on the invite. But Rick is currently co-producing, is it, on public television?
Yep.
Show about Great Lakes shipwrecks. And Rick and I have had a lot of experiences going back for quite a while. We've done quite a few things together. So, ladies and gentlemen, Rick Mixter. Yay, Rick.
It's great to be here. I mean, I know how much time you put into putting together pictures and all of the information that you have. It's not like you can just open up a book and throw it there. I know the time that you put into this, Brendan, and it's appreciated. I'll tell you, people who aren't even really into shipwrecks that are my friends, they watch that stuff, they love it, and it's time well spent. We don't get a dime for doing a lot of this stuff, but we do it because we love it.
It's definitely not a profit center. It's a cost center.
It's too much fun, though.
All of our guests can agree with that. So Rick, even though we've known each other for a long time, I'm going to ask you a couple of things that I guess I don't know about you. And
okay.
For starters, Rick, how did you get into this? I mean, what got you into the whole shipwreck thing?
Well, I grew up in Marquette. In fact, I was the oldest of 7 kids. We lived in a trailer. Our aunt came to live with us, so there was 10 people in a trailer. I never dreamt I could afford scuba diving, although I had a really good friend who was a scuba diver, and we'd go to the rock quarry, we'd go to the ore docks, and he'd swim around, and I'd sit on shore and just be jealous. So that was kind of the catalyst. And then the history part of it was just, I loved ancient history. I learned Phoenician when I was 15 and would sign all my papers in Phoenician. And my world history teacher hated it because I was a class clown, but I still got A's because I ate it up. I didn't do very well in math. My science grades were pretty miserable, but the history stuff was great. So it's always been there, the stories. And then I just got into radio, and I would kind of tell stories there, but most of it was, being a DJ. And then I went into television when I was 18 years old, professional TV, a newsman. And I was just caught by video and audio and interviews. And that translated into shipwreck storytelling in the late 1980s. When the Jupiter exploded, we had a tanker explosion in Bay City, and we stayed out there 2 nights as the largest tanker ever burned. And sadly, one sailor was lost. And I got to walk on the decks after Boots and Coots put it out. They foamed the wreck, and we went out to this melted deck, and I couldn't believe it. So now I had to learn the biggest shipwrecks on the lakes and the biggest storms. And it was just really good timing for me because at that time there were still survivors from 1905 that remembered the storm, 1913. And so I started digging, and that's where it built. I found 1913 survivors. You helped me find 1940 survivors. And that became really, I think, what my hallmark is. And I'm the shipwreck survivor and rescuer guy who's interviewed more eyewitnesses to shipwreck disaster than anybody. So that's how I got hooked.
Cool, Rick. Yeah, it's kind of addictive. Once it gets in your veins, it's pretty hard to get out of it. So I know you've done a lot of stuff, and I own most of your documentaries. Probably the Deep Six, is one of my favorites. But why don't you tell me a little bit about what some of your favorite projects, major things that you've done have been, and what did you particularly enjoy about them?
And I started diving in '91. So, and I went diving in the Thunder Bay Preserve. We actually had a series on TV5, the CBS Now affiliate in Saginaw, and it's called Our Town. So I produced that show, and it turned out that they said, well, there's shipwrecks in Thunder Bay. So I borrowed a camera from Sequatics Dive Shop. I recorded a couple of stories, and then I hit Michigan Association of Broadcasters First Place Award, AP Award, and the TV station was hooked. They're like, go tell more shipwreck stories. So I bought my own gear, and Amphibico helped me with cost. Viking gave me a dry suit because they knew they'd get good visibility, and they have for, almost 25 years now. So I found shipwreck stories, and then they started to find me. As soon as I did the 1913 documentary, somebody called and said, do you want to dive the Edmund Fitzgerald? And we thought it was a joke. How could we dive that? And it turned out that Whitefish Point had gone up there several times, with a ROV and then a submarine. And finally in '94, a guy said, I'm going to rent a submarine and you guys can pay me to come along. Well, it turns out our competition, Channel 7 or Channel 12, had been there several times. So I said, our station's not going to pay for something like that, but we'd help you. So we provided all the surface support. I was also the diver. I was the only guy that got in the water in '94. So I dove in, filmed the Delta submarine, and unbelievably, we found a missing crewman. So that, again, took and propelled us into a new limelight that was just different than the other coverage that was there. And it started my lecture stuff at that point where people wanted to hear about it. And for the longest time, I wouldn't talk because out of respect for the guy who paid for everything, I didn't talk about the Fitzgerald. I was talking about 1913 and, all the wrecks that I've already covered by then. So that's where the projects came in. I made a documentary for him for free, and he sold copies. He never made his money back on the submarine voyage. But then I made the Edmund Fitzgerald investigations for a company called ImageWorks, and made Deep Six for them too. And they made a lot of money on it, and I made very tiny amounts of money on it. So I eventually bought those back from them and went on the lecture circuit. And now I do probably 50 lectures all around the Great Lakes. I'll be in Minneapolis. I just got back from NASA. I actually did a talk at the Goddard Space Flight Laboratory on the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's crazy. I'm surprised that people, that far out. I mean, I'm not, because I know the song, but the shipwrecks, of the Great Lakes just seem to fascinate everybody. And I love telling them, and I'll never slow down doing that.
Rick, that's got to have been an amazing experience descending down to the Edmund Fitzgerald in a submarine. I think you're one of the only people I've ever talked to that's actually seen her with his own eyes. And not only that, but unexpectedly discovering a crewman, that had to have been a real gut-wrenching experience. What was that like going down there?
For me, I mean, this is a roller coaster ride, because you're so excited and so happy that you're seeing the biggest shipwreck on the Great Lakes, hands down the most famous shipwreck on the Great Lakes. And then that comes up. We knew that there were 29 guys down there. And don't get me wrong, I've dove 150 shipwrecks. Most of them had people who died on there. Those are grave sites to me. And every time I go down, I literally want to make sure that has the reverence of any shipwreck that has a loss of life on there. And it just turned out in just such a bizarre way that I came up on the third dive of our first day, and the Delta still had some power left in the batteries. And the tug owner asked us if he could take his son down there. And we thought we'd get a deal on the tug if he went. And sure enough, we were on board the Anglian Lady, and the tug owner, Jack Purvis, and his son went down. And it was his son that found that missing crewman. And the crewman had what looked like blocks around the chest area, which turned out to be an old cork life vest, the kind, Fitzgerald had both types on board, the Kapok and the cork one. Now, we just crashed at that point. We were devastated to know that, all the other Coast Guard had been there. Jacques Cousteau had been down, his son, Jean-Michel. The Whitefish Point had been there twice. No one reported this. So either they saw it and didn't say something, which is totally possible, or they just missed it because it was off of the bow section near where the open door was. So here we are, devastated now. We don't know what we're going to do to call the Canadian government, because that's part of our license to tell them what's going on. And we did. And what we did was we recorded everything that was there, and we never went back. Out of respect for that area, we knew what we had. We left it there. And then the real challenge came back up after we did our next day of diving, because then we had to tell the press about it. And we had to, again, do it in a light that was special. So here's that roller coaster again, where you want to be excited because the song is Lake Superior is said never gives up its dead. We changed that. We found a missing crewman there. So it was extremely significant. Now, that came back to haunt us because many of the family members were very upset, either A, because we didn't bring the body back, or B, because they thought that, we were capitalizing on that, which was never, ever what we wanted to do. It was just where the reporters went with the story every time. And there's several people who thought that body isn't part of it. A very renowned researcher, Fred Stonehouse, wrote the first book on Fitzgerald, doesn't believe it is a crewman. So, there's that possibility. I don't think that's true. I think the proximity but there's certainly other people who were lost in that area. It just doesn't seem likely at that point. But that's the emotions, Brendan. It was excited. It was happy. It was angry when people got mad at us later. I had to put the documentary together. What shot do you use? Do you not use a shot and then have everybody tell you you're lying, you didn't see it? So and to this day, I still get people, with very, very rude comments on Facebook, on YouTube. My video about the body, which does not contain the picture, has over 3 million hits. So people want to see it, but they get mad when they don't see it. And it's just, I try not to read the comments because many of them are really bad and other ones are very positive.
Sure. Yeah, well, I appreciate you discussing it, Rick, because it is one of those things that, people have strong feelings about. Many people feel differently about it, and I myself am, not a big fan of the sort of glorifying the whole thing and reviewing it. But I do think that it was an important discovery, an important story to tell. So I appreciate the fact that you did that. Let's switch on to a little bit of a funner topic. One of the things that you did recently was you got to go down in the bottom of the Pole Locks. They had it drained. tell me a little bit about that? What that's like?
Yeah, it's brand new with my new job as the co-producer for Great Lakes Now. Our show isn't just shipwrecks. We do all things about the Great Lakes. And so certainly the Soo Locks, the significance is since 1855, we've had a method of raising and lowering ships from the height of Lake Superior to the 18 to 20 feet down to Lake Huron. And that lock system does that, where the boats go in and they can raise and lower. And that's done through water, the water going into a chamber and lowering it. We went into that chamber as they drained it out to clean it up, and some of the valves are having issues. So we crawled way in there, even on our hands and knees, through the very bottom of there's these transits at the very bottom that are barely big enough to put my shoulders through. So it'll all be on the web. I took a couple pictures on my Facebook page, but we'll have that stuff posted. There's 19 PBS stations that air our show, so we'll be showing that stuff. I think the last part of February is when this show will air. But the story, I just wrote it yesterday. I got out of the water. I mean, out of the lock. Yesterday, Monday. Monday was when I was there. Tuesday, I drove home, wrote the story, and now they're posting it right now at PBS in Detroit. So it's super exciting. I filmed a bunch of stuff with my own camera, so I'll be able to showcase that so people can see exactly what my adventure was. And Brendan, that brings up a really cool thing. The best part about me being in television and a storyteller is that while I get to do fly B-52s, F-16s, bungee jumps, skydiving, all the crazy stuff, I get to bring viewers along with me. That's where I find the most joy in this. It's neat to jump out of an airplane. It's neat to go hunt alligators with Ted Nugent. The better part is to bring back the video and show it to people and say, this is the crazy stuff, and then maybe inspire people, because again, I'm a Yooper kid from a trailer. I never even finished college. There's no specialness here at all, except for what I believe to be a super smile. I'm almost always happy. People like to be around me, and that's led to some very cool adventures. There's no secret. I'm not the world's best diver. I'm certainly not the world's best videographer or reporter or, producer. But you put it all together with a smile, and it seems to turn out. I'm always, thrilled to share a story and an adventure with people, and I hope they like going along with me.
I'm sure they do, Rick. Can you tell me a little bit about the program? What's it called on public television, and how'd you get involved?
Great Lakes Now, I like to think I've been groomed for this for 30 years. That literally, the time I spent watching my buddy dive and watching ships in Marquette, all the way up to all of the people I've interviewed. I walked into the job interview and there was an opening for an editor. And when they found out that I had all this Great Lakes experience, they said, you should really go on this show. Now, secretly, I had already seen about the show and I wanted to be on it. So I was trying anything to get into Detroit. When I grew up in the trailer, we had two channels, PBS and CBS. So they're never going to find a bigger supporter of public broadcasting. And it's a perfect venue to share the ecology of the lakes, the fragility of the lakes. We look at PFAS and we look at, the PCBs that are in there, and the algae blooms now in Lake Erie, and the zebra mussels and quagga mussels and lamprey. There's so many stories in science. There's so many stories in environmental protection, and especially the part that I love is the history part of it. And I think that's the flavor that I'm bringing in that wasn't there before. They had done one story on Thunder Bay, and now all of a sudden they're hooked. Last month we did a story on the shipwreck piece that I talked with you about, the barge piece they found in Muskegon. And they said, well, do what you can, Rick. And I actually found a guy that was on a barge in 49 that survived. It probably wasn't that piece, but to find a survivor from 49, and it's just what I do best. So we gave a new flavor on that, and maybe, a personal story, I think, to some of the maritime history, especially in that area.
Very, very cool, Rick. And it's really awesome that you were able to be on that show, and they can really have somebody who's an expert from our community, basically our shipwreck community, on there telling those stories. Because
I hate to say expert, though. I look at expert and I look at you.
Right,
I mean, honestly, you know, more, you know, people like Pat Labadie and Fred Stonehouse, and I could go on and on. There's so many people who've forgotten more about history than I'll ever know. What I've done really well is to personalize it. I've been able to really find people who survived and then make it into something. My early documentaries I look at now and I just shake my head. They're so rudimentary, but when you look at the credits, you're only going to see Rick Mixter on there. I don't have editors and I don't have financiers and stuff like that. The best stuff are collaborations with people who work with amazing cameramen and camera women. And I mean, I think of just the talent that's in the lake right now. Becky Schott taking pictures that make my jaw drop. You know, we are at such an amazing time period with new wreck hunters, with amazing storytellers that I see at the shows now. I'm really excited about shipwrecks and how these stories will be told.
Yeah, same here, Rick. I think it's an exciting time, especially with social media like this. So I know you and I have done a bunch of stuff together. Rick and I are both Upers, and I'm from up in the Copper Country. We kind of cut our teeth on some of the same wrecks. But I'll never forget the day you contacted me and said you were coming to Milwaukee, and would I go on a dive of the Appomattox with you? For those of you who don't know, the Appomattox is one of Davidson's Goliaths, one of the largest wooden ships ever built. James Davidson was building these massive 300-foot wooden vessels when everyone else was building metal. Well, the biggest of them is right off of Milwaukee. And so Rick wanted to see it.
Easier said than done, brother.
Oh, boy. And if it wasn't for Rick, we wouldn't be here tonight because Rick saved my bacon on that. Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the first thing is that there's no shore there. I remember the stairs of death. What isn't there like 500 steps to get down to the water there? And it was just, you know, you're super excited when you get there with your gear and you run down and you're good. By the end of it, when you're taking everything out, and especially with us, it was a swim. And I just remember getting out there and both of us just being exhausted. I would say there's no chance in heck I saved your life on that wreck. It was just really tiring. And I know that we both, you know, we pushed it right to the limit at that point. But we got some pictures. There's a beautiful prop out there. And the visibility back then was not nearly as good as it is now with the zebra mussels cleaning it up. So there's still a lot more for me to see there. And I know that many of the archaeologists, I think Tamara's been out there and a couple other people have done a lot better surveys than what we had when we went out and just kind of poking around with, I think, a single float that was on it. But it was awesome. And I got to hang out with my buddy Brendan, so it could be better than that.
It was something. There's this huge thing of switchbacks, staircases going down the hill. We were carrying our tanks and all our gear, and I mean, we were a lot younger then. But part of the problem, and I've almost bought it a couple of times by not saving enough air to get to shore. You know, you can't just save enough air to get to the surface. And I got out there, and it's really, really far from shore. It's really barely a shore dive, and
it was far from calm too.
and I didn't know how I was going to swim in because I was overweighted, and I was trying to stay on my back, and I just kept, keep kicking. I made it to shore, and I just collapsed on the beach. I remember that. It was easily the worst dive I've ever had, but it was fun. It was
a good weekend. I got to get on I got to get on the Prince Willem and the car ferry that weekend too. So it was a fantastic dive with some amazing people, and you made it special. Your interview that I did for my first PBS series, Great Lakes in Depth, was a big show, and it was so much fun, and we really got to showcase an area that, way before other people were doing videos, on shipwrecks over there.
Yeah, it was one of the things that I remember, where I remember you best, is the old Ghost Ships Festival. So for those of you who remember, years ago, Kim Stovelfeld, Bob Jake, myself, and I think it was Tim Reed, we cooked up this idea for this event. And it was going to be little, we were going to do it at the Milwaukee Library, and we called it the Ghost Ships Festival. And lo and behold, it really took off, and of course it went through a lot of changes over the years, but Rick was always one of our favorite people to come because he was such a great, storyteller and a great personality to have there at our event. Unfortunately, it's kind of Kim and I moved to Madison, and Kim had some health issues, and but we're talking about putting something back together again for the
Wow.
Wisconsin community. More to come on that in the future, but there are a number of us working on putting together a smaller event. It won't be the dive, sort of equipment trade show that Ghost Ships had turned into, and the community is kind of getting smaller now too for that kind of thing. So we're going to see what we can do about it.
I would be honored. I went to the very first Ghost Festival, and we were arguing on whether or not that's where I met you. And I don't think it was, but I remember how small it was and how big it grew, and how I wanted to be there every year. But I would tell them, you know what? People are going to get sick of hearing me. So I would go every third year and just I'll find something to talk about. I try not to do the dive shows. I don't want people to go and go, yeah, it's just Rick. I want it to be, something cool. But that Ghost Ships is a special place in my heart.
Yeah, the whole speaker thing, I really got burned out by it, and I quit doing it. And I do a couple of things for institutions that I really like the Wisconsin Maritime Museum or the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association, the state's of Wisconsin's archaeology program. I'll go around and do stuff for institutions, but I don't really, you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about. It can get
a part of it, but I'll tell you, I've got to do it. I mean, if I go 2 weekends without talking, thank heavens now I'm in Charlevoix at least twice a year, and I've got different spots that we pack Monroe, a theater of 300. We pack it every year, and it's been 4 years in a row. And then with the Storm concert, it's 2 hours with Dan Hall doing the music. It's the best way to hear a lecture where I can talk and throw up interviews on the big screen. I just have to do it. I will never stop telling stories live. It's the best way to do it.
It is fun. I've got a couple of things myself. I'm doing a workshop actually on restoration of rare books. Because if you look behind me, and obviously you can kind of see this, I have umpteen billion antique books about maritime history on the Great Lakes and community history, and I buy them in rough shape and I fix them up, and I learned how to do it. And so there's a lot of interest in this. And how do you preserve old paper items and old ephemera, books, maps. And so doing a workshop for them. I think it's the 15th.
Wow.
And, yeah. And I like that organization. So I'm going to bring in some of my books, and my mom is coming down from the UP. She's going to help me to do it. Yeah, and so that we're going to do sort of an antiques roadshow where you can bring in your stuff and tell you what I think about, what we take to fix it and what it's worth, and if it's worth fixing, kind of thing. We'll see how it goes. I don't know.
I hope you'll record it. I would love to see that.
I think it's going to be live streamed by the museum.
That would be amazing.
And then I am giving a talk, I think in May or April, on an interesting topic that I would like to chat about with you, and it's going to be on the Griffin.
Oh, cool. I love that story. I think out of all of the tales on the Great Lakes, and there's so many shows that I go out and make up nonsense about Bermuda Triangles and all this other stuff. For my money, if that's not a Hollywood movie one day, that you can try to sell me the Fitzgerald, the Bradley, all these stories. Yeah, they're incredible. But the stories and the people like Tonti and LaSalle, there's too much great stuff in there, and the ending is completely tragic. So I think it'd be a great movie.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, LaSalle walking across lower Michigan in the winter with the Iroquois on his tail, and he can't light a fire because he doesn't want to attract them. And his two men get sick, and he has to carry them halfway across the state. Then he builds a raft and floats down the river into Lake Erie with these two men that can't even walk. And then he gets in the canoes, goes over to Lake Erie, and finds these men that had deserted him and arrests them and brings them to justice.
And his henchman has one hand.
It's just a crazy story. And what's interesting about it to me is that it's so well documented in the letters of those men themselves. That's what my talk is about. It's about primary sources. How do we know what we think we know? And the answer is they all left first-person accounts. Tonti, LaSalle, all the Recollect friars that were with them. There's more first-person accounts of the Griffin than modern shipwrecks.
Well, and you're
But
lucky because you speak French.
I read it.
Yeah. Well,
My French is
I
pretty
wish
good.
I had that because those primary sources, I'm really tied to, Margery and all the translations that are there. And you hope that they, obviously they have credibility, but
Yeah,
I
they're
think
pretty
it'd be
good.
greater to see it.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. And I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on it, but it's one of the things that we've talked about quite a lot, and
Hmm.
about the sort of it's the most discovered shipwreck on the Great Lakes. I think Chris Cole has done a great job of documenting all of the fake discoveries. He told me once that I think he came up with 27, or was it 37 different different
Yeah.
discovery claims.
Wayne Lusardi told me there were 17, as state underwater archaeologist of Michigan. He's had 17 claims on it, and only two of them were shipwrecks. The rest were all kinds of other stuff. And I guess I'm more upset about those because I understand the news cycle, and I get upset with the journalists who will just grab the microphone, throw it on anybody who wants to say that, and they don't bother to try to call even a state authority to say, hey, is this right? Because they just want it to be true.
Yeah, there's a lot of that goes on. I think the story is that one of the Griffins still had the tar paper and roofing nails in it.
Oh yeah,
From the-
a steam pump on the one off of Muskegon, which again, it's a waste of Wayne's time to go out there and have to look at it. But they instantly get publicity, and God bless them. I mean, they're out there looking at shipwrecks, and they do bring international attention to us every time they claim it. So is that good? Yeah, it's good. But again, there's so many real stories that are out there. Just look at last season alone with all the wrecks that were found, Bernie Hellstrom stuff and all the stuff that they're with Eliason. And, it's amazing that even Whitefish found, I think, two more with the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society. There's a lot of real stuff happening, and I wish that would get more headlines.
Yeah, the two big finds off the Keweenaw that just blew me away. Jerry Eliason's find of the Hudson,
Oh
and
yeah,
then the Great Lakes Shipwreck Society's find of the Kirby.
Kirby. Yeah.
And I think those are amazing wrecks that I grew up, sort of daydreaming about. And I'll never forget, I put together an expedition to go out and find those with
Wow.
Harry Zeik, and, which never quite came to fruition. We got my dad's boat all rigged up, and Harry was going to come with the Klein. And at the last minute, as always, he got a call because a plane crashed in Lake Michigan or in some Great Lake. But Rick, we lost Harry a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
to those of you who knew him, he was not the friendliest or easygoing guy. He didn't suffer fools well, but Rick and I remember him fondly.
Mm-hmm.
What are your favorite memories of Harry?
It was together with you. I mean, he was always kind of on the warpath, especially in Michigan. As he had some people that obviously were not his friends. But you and I got to go out and look for shipwrecks off of Pentwater together with him, and it was just great to be with him. Half the stories you wanted him to prove because they seemed almost just too big to be true, but you kind of knew that they were there. And I'm lucky enough that I have a quick interview that we did with him in Chicago. And at least we've got that, because I'd love to dive the Lady Elgin. It's just too historic. And I made a promise to him that I would never do a documentary on that shipwreck without his permission. And now he's gone. So I guess it's open now, and it's kind of in no man's land. I just feel worse for the artifacts that came up, that to know that those things probably will never get the care or the attention that they deserve. It's sad to think what'll happen to those.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Harry Zeik found the Lady Elgin, one of the most famous and historic shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. And this was right after the passage of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act of 1987. And Harry found a safe on the wreck, and it had a bunch of $20 gold pieces in it. Because
Wow.
the publisher of the London Illustrated News, Herbert Ingraham, was on the boat with his son, and they died. And they had, at that time, there was no paper money. They had brought all the gold coins with them for their whole trip through the Americas. And they were in the safe because he had checked them with the purser. And so Harry didn't want to leave those on the bottom. He called the state up. This is per Harry's story. He called up the state and said, I found this really important wreck. Are you interested in doing anything? And they didn't believe him, basically, and said, no, we don't have the time or the interest. And then they found out about the the safe. And then they filed 18 felony charges against him per Harry. And he ended up going to court he was not some sport diver. They were going to make him the poster child, I guess, for the Abandoned Shipwreck Act. He is a commercial salver. That's his business. And so he called up the Aetna Insurance Company and said, I found your wreck. Would you sell it to me for $1? And they did. And so Harry ended up legally owning the Lady Elgin, but the state said, you can't, it's abandoned. Well, Harry said, no, the insurance company still has their records from 1860, and they say it's not abandoned. It went to the Supreme Court, and Harry won. And so the Lady Elgin ended up being one of the only privately owned wrecks on the Great Lakes. Wow. And Harry kind of became famous as he's the little man who stood up to the government and won. But a difficult guy, a friend of ours, but and a loss, I think, overall, just because he was so colorful,
Yeah. There's no shortage on the colorful characters on the Great Lakes, and that's been a real blessing to be able to meet so many people and share stories. I wish that more of them would get put down. I at one time dreamt about doing a video on all of the famous wreck hunters, but when John Steele got sick and couldn't do an interview, I was just like, you can't do that and call yourself a complete story. So, but there's great people, great divers, and the people who went before me, the Feltners who were filming underwater, Copeland who was making videos on the Morel. These people were doing stuff that with film in huge lights and dinosaur equipment. It's just amazing to think what they were doing. I'm lucky now. We can practically take a cell phone down there and edit it, on a computer. So yeah, I've got it easy now.
Rick, have you ever seen the footage of John Steele on the Kamloops?
I've only heard parts of that. I've never seen the official, and I do believe that stuff was bought by somebody too.
Well, it was donated by the family to Dan Johnson down at the Lockwood Scuba Museum in Rockford.
Nice.
And what was happening, the stern of the Kamloops, for those of you who don't know, is in 180, and the bow is in like 260, and it's sitting off Isle Royal with the engineer still in the engine room. Anyway, they wanted to put a mooring line on the bow. They went down there on air. This is back in the 70s. They're not even on mixed gas. They're down there, and he starts tying on the mooring line, and he's being filmed by Kent Bellrichard. And all of a sudden, he stops, and he looks, and you can see that he's tied his emergency regulator, his second stage, into the rope, and he has tethered himself to the wreck in 265 feet of water. Just then, there's a boom and a big explosion, and it looks like stars falling from the sky. The dive light blew up from the pressure, and glass went flying everywhere, and it went pitch black, and the film ends.
That's crazy. And every nightmare I've ever had.
And they lived. Those guys were something. They really were something. We lost John a few years ago. I work with his granddaughter, Michelle Moreno, and they've been wonderful. Just donating the film and their artifacts so that they were properly preserved.
Amazing.
So, Rick, do you remember what we were looking for when we were out with Harry off Pentwater?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I wanted to get some more stuff, I thought, on the Novadoc for a project, but there was something we were looking for, and we saw an old wagon that was laying on the bottom. But what was it?
We were looking for the wreck of the Neptune, the earliest wreck on that whole shore of Lake Michigan, 1839.
That's right.
An old story that we heard from a guy named Don Balcom, who was a commercial salver. And there was a tug that had stranded there back in the 60s. And he had lost some deck load, machinery off the deck. And Don was sledding the area. Call that the Polish side scan, you hold the thing, they tow you underwater. And he came across the bow of a ship sticking out of the sandbar with anchor chains paid out from it. And there's a really good paper trail for that wreck at that location from 1839. And it's intact from what Don said. And this was back in like the 70s that he saw this. Wow. We've gone a couple of times now. Now you can look from Google Earth and see that stuff but the wreck is completely buried under the sandbar. So somewhere in the Little Sable Point area is a perfectly preserved, almost 1839 wreck of a brig, one of the earliest three-masted vessels. She was a bark, actually, one of the earliest three-masted vessels on the Great Lakes, and it's completely buried by that sandbar. And
Wow.
yeah, and no, we saw some boards, but it wasn't what Don said he saw.
No, no, it was more the adventure with you and with Harry there. That will always be in my heart. That's a good memory.
It definitely is. Definitely is. So, Rick, a couple other things we were going to talk about a little bit. One of the things that I would like to hear from you a little bit about is the Rouse Simmons.
Yeah, that's a story that it's always kind of fascinated me, and it upset so many historians because there was a kid's book, if you will, that was written about it, and half of the stuff in it was very fictionalized, and it was really, I mean, if you read the newspapers, that's the best part because the newspapers just played that up, man. That he was Captain Santa, and when he passed away, the widows, they got great coverage. They couldn't have paid for that coverage. Sadly, of course, Schooneman was killed. That's a wreck that I really want to go see. But my fascination for it was the fact that that really wasn't the official Christmas tree wreck. It was called the Christmas tree ship, and they'd used it, but the Wren was actually the ship that they'd used for years and years, and that's the one that made the famous headlines as you read through the old Chicago papers into the early 1900s. And it turns out that the Wren was tied up to one called the Me, and that's the picture you see of Schooneman. That's not the Rouse Simmons that they're on. That's the Me, the John Me, which was the Pauline built in Milwaukee and sailed. And it turns out a guy in one of my audiences in Saginaw came up to me and gave me a shoebox, and it was actually it was shoebox, and it had a little photo novel with penciled in names on it or on the original pictures, and it was the final voyage of the Me, which was at that time called the Skeel, and it went up to Manitoulin. It was one of the last schooners on the Great Lakes, and it just crashed ashore, and they brought a photographer from Milwaukee with them. So it is the most detailed shipwreck ever. It shows them sailing past the water intake in Chicago. It shows them wearing sou'westers with, they look like the Gordon Fish guy on the deck of the schooner going past the Grand Hotel. So the photos that go in there they're jaw dropping. The Captain Larson, who was famous for getting a gold medal saving lives off of Racine, was on board this with his other son, another Larson, and you see him carving out the yawl boat. And then in the next picture is a storm coming, and it shows these logs all going on board. And then it shows their yawl boat washing ashore. And then you see a picture of them with a wrecked ship in the back. So here's this full chronicle, never before seen on the Great Lakes, that was just handed to me. So
Wow.
we've been looking for this wreck on Manitoulin for years. And everybody says, we know where it is, and there's pieces of it. And I made a video and put it on YouTube and just said, you know what? I think that this wreck is out here somewhere, and I hope you can help me find it. And I showed the Joyland and a couple other wrecks that were shallow, so it had some intrinsic value, and people would watch it and pass it on. 3 years later, Brendan, a guy called me up and said, that wreck's off of my deer camp. So sure enough, I went out there, and my son and I went and did a very rudimentary search and found lots of stuff. We just haven't found the entire wreck, which is probably ground to a pulp, but that is the Christmas tree ship. So we hope to tell a better story, and then using the amazing imagery that I've seen off of the Rouse Simmons too. I think that is the real story, and that's what I hope to build on. So that's something for us to maybe go explore Manitoulin and look around, Brendan.
It's a great story, Rick. So we're getting well into the show, and before we turn to take questions from our viewers, Rick, was there anything in particular that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about, or any stories you'd like to tell?
Man, there's so many. I mean, we could do a 5-hour special. I mean, I think about after we dove the Fitz, we were the first to find the Carl Bradley, the largest shipwreck in Lake Michigan, and now divers go there all the time. I see this stuff from the amazing camera of John Jansen and Scholes, and the stuff that's down there was not what we found. When we dove it, I did an interview, as you know, in Deep Six. We talked to U.S. Steel's president, Bukema, who talked about the ship breaking or not breaking in two. And of course, knowing Frank Mays, we took a submarine out there to prove that it was in two pieces, and I couldn't. And when we went down, the visibility was so bad, the submarine crashed into the wreck, and we managed to drop a plaque. And Jim Clary, the artist, managed to get under the propeller where we started to figure out, kind of how it laid on the bottom. They went back in 97 and swore it was in two pieces 90 feet apart. It's in several newspapers that's what Frank and Fred and Jim Clary said that they saw. And it's hogwash. That wreck is not separated. It's got a big break in the deck, but it's nonsense that it's in two. So that's another one of those stories that if we don't get down there and get great side scan and prove that it's connected someplace, it's buried on the side. I believe it's the starboard side has a 20-foot gap in it, but it is not ripped on the bottom and 90 feet apart for sure.
That's interesting. That's the first I've heard of that. And it's a long ways out there. Unfortunately, it's a really long ways out there. I was just out at the Beavers this summer. We took my partner Gina and we took our boat out there, and we came across from Sochois Point and spent a week out on the Beavers hunting and jumping from looking at all the different islands. And I thought, well, we should really get out there to Gull Island. That's where the Bradley is. And I looked at a map and I was like, yeah, the gas was $6 a gallon. Marina there.
Not going to happen.
Excellent.
Well, that area of Fox, I mean, we've been talking about the wrecks that are out there, and I would be thrilled as I've interviewed, a couple of keepers that were out on those lights. I also do so much with lighthouses as the former president of Great Lakes Lighthouse Keepers Association. I've got an affinity for those too. I think that's where we need to go this summer. The Fox would be amazing to see a lot of those shallow ones that you can see right on Google Earth.
Yeah, definitely. It's filthy with shipwrecks out there, just filthy with them. And I've identified a number of them. And I'm in the process of writing a book. It may turn into a series of books now because there's too darn many wrecks to fit in, right? Yeah. I've been focused on the beavers and the foxes lately. It's just been fun because it's an area of the lake that has been underserved.
Mm-hmm.
So, folks, at this time, we'll be interested to take your questions. Somebody put one here that I guess I'll throw out there for us. You may know about this wreck. It's a Keweenaw wreck. 1851 in the Red Ridge Freda area, a big steamer called the Monticello went ashore. In 1968, Inland Seas published a first-person account of a survivor of that wreck. And if you'll recall, that's the one where the captain ordered the passengers and the crew to keep bailing at gunpoint because they had given up hope. And the ship came crashing ashore, and they all had to go, like hand over hand over lines, to get to the beach in this horrible surf. And then they had to walk. They didn't know that they were as close to the Keweenaw waterway as they were. They ended up walking all the way to Eagle Harbor. And the captain, the people gave the captain of that ship 2 silver goblets as a reward for saving their lives.
Wow.
And, keeping their spirits up on that long hike all the way up to, it was Eagle Harbor. And that captain and those goblets are sitting on the bottom of the lake off Winnetka, Illinois today, because that was Captain Jack Wilson, who eventually piloted the Lady Elgin. And those silver goblets were his personal, sort of, they were engraved to him, And,
wow.
He was lost. But no one's ever found the Monticello. It was carrying mass copper on its decks. And so somewhere in the Freda Red Ridge area there's a wreck, probably broken to hell, but with big pieces of mass copper laying on the bottom. What do you think?
That area is awesome. I mean, with all the life-saving metals that came out of that area, that's a neat area from 1913 on. And
I'm going up to this spring. Want to go?
I'm there. Let's go. We'll go find the City of Bangor pieces, what's left after the salvage in World War II.
I'll bring a little side scan. We can take my little boat.
I'm in. I'll pack a lunch.
Rick and I have been talking about this, about going up to the Keweenaw and doing a little sort of live broadcast thing from the point, from the U of M rocket launch pad, and just kicking around in the woods and doing guy stuff. It would be fun. All right. What else do we have for questions from anybody? Just watching. If anybody wants to ask any questions live right now, feel free. Rick, me, Otherwise, we're going to keep spinning yarns here.
We've got enough yarn. One of my favorite stories up there is the L.C. Waldo story with the
Oh yeah,
13 medals that came out of that. The Waldo actually made many years as the Mohawk Deer and existed until they hauled it to Italy and it sank right off the harbor in Genoa. So I've been trying to save my pop cans to go out there because here's a Bay City built shipwreck, the L.C. Waldo that sits there now in the Mediterranean. And it's, we've got so many of our Michigan and especially Wisconsin built wrecks that are all around the world. And so we're slowly trying to figure out how can we do that? There's all kinds of patrol craft that was lost. There's a destroyer escort that was lost. Submersibles. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that would be neat to bring in the ocean. I dove the Hollyhock, which was built in Bay City, that's off of Florida now. So there's a lot of cool history that was built in the Great Lakes that's now in the ocean, and that just adds a whole nother flavor.
Yeah, definitely. And we have a question from a viewer. What was the first wreck both of you ever dived on? And I think mine was probably up in the Keweenaw waterway. More than likely, I'd say the Mediator off of Michigan Tech that I just wrote an article about in the Gazette, the Daily Mining Gazette. Said we finally identified it, but we've known what the wreck was for 30 years. I used to go clean fishing lures off of it, and by the bucket, go into this town and sell them for $1 a piece. What's your first wreck,
Rick? Easy to remember. It was the Mana handset off of Thunder Bay. I had that borrowed camera and filmed that boiler and swam through it and had great sunlight because it's only in 20 feet of water. We had worse time getting on the Montana afterwards. The visibility was lousy and it was starting to kick up. For some reason, the floats were all being pulled. It was late in the season, and I think that the charter operator who was pulling the buoys was mad that we weren't using their charter because they knew we were going out there. So it was just kind of a real folly of us trying to get what we needed for our TV special, and still it turned out awesome. But Mana handset. And I glided over it in the glass bottom boat up there, and it was thrilling to see her again and be a little bit warmer as I did see it.
So we have another question from a viewer. Rick, when you dove the Fitz, did you go with Fred Shannon? He also saw what you saw. Was that with Fred? I thought it was.
Yeah. Fred led the expedition. Ironically, a lot of people tell me, they're like, well, why don't you mention him in your talks? Well, there was a big fallout after I made the documentary and we did the Bradley. He was not happy that I was speaking on the shipwrecks. He thought that he should be the king of shipwrecks. And there's a little difference there. I wanted to still talk. I'd been talking about the 1913 storm and a bunch of other stuff. So he told me, he goes in a letter, first he sent his attorneys after me, and then he said, I'm not allowed to mention his name ever again. And I was all too happy to accommodate that. By every time I bring it up, I just call about the expedition leader rather than mention his name. I'm sorry to hear that he's very sick right now, and I think of him in very positive ways, as the song that was written by Dan Hall and Dave Norris called "Shore of Your Dreams" was about that quest to, take everything he had, his wife's dream home, put it into a submarine and do what nobody else did. And that's find, a missing crewman of the 29. So I think of him very highly, but unfortunately there was a huge falling out, and that's why you won't see me, especially on stage, mention his name.
Yeah, I think that happens. Eventually you're in this business long enough, you have fallings out with people, and sometimes you get back together too. I've gone through a number of those things. Just people get their feelings hurt, during this business. Yeah. And especially in the wreck finding thing, if you do wreck hunting, because the truth of the matter is it's very rare that like one man, to quote my friend Dan Fountain, goes out and finds a wreck, right? Yeah. It's usually a bunch of stuff, like with the case of the LR Doty off Milwaukee, well, there's a whole, it's just hard to tell. The news won't tell the long tail, so they wanted to give a name. But the fact of the matter is a commercial fisherman snagged that wreck and told Jerry Geyer about it. Jerry knew the numbers, but, and then I found an account that led us to believe that was, in fact, the LR Doty. So I said so in my book, we should go out and look at this. And then yet Kahanakova went out with her boat and was the first person to actually run a sonar over it and put a diver down on it. And sure enough, it was the LR Doty, just as predicted. So
Wow.
who found the wreck? I mean, we all did, I think. But so what happens is, though, if one person there, gets the what have you, feelings get hurt.
Yeah.
And that same story over and over and over again on the Great Lakes. And I've kind of gotten out of it for that reason, the whole thing. The speaking thing in particular is that I think that there's too much of that sort of, chest thumping wreck hunter mentality. I think in the modern era, most of these sites have been found before. And if they haven't been, like in the case of the Hudson or the Kirby, I think the fact of the matter is both those groups that were out there at the same time ran them over.
Yeah.
And you got to give both guys credit. They really, those groups, they spent a lot of money and a lot of time, and they're trying to tell stories. And so I applaud both of those groups for doing that. And who found it, and getting into ego wars about that stuff is just, it doesn't serve our community well.
No, and you see that in divers early on that were trying to bring up artifacts and then get museum displays with their name on it and stuff. I get it. I mean, it's kind of like you want to be the pharaoh and have your name carved into the pyramid. That's not ever been. I'm glad that people like my stories. I only tell them because I'm too cheap to pay for somebody else that's more talented to tell them than me. I think that, the biggest misconception is that there's money to be made in this. And the truth is that, with 30 documentaries, I don't think anybody's made as many documentaries about the Great Lakes and had them all on TV. I haven't made a dime on that stuff, really. I mean, if you look at the costs and stuff that you do, that's where the feelings get hurt. When people really start to believe, well, this guy's obviously making money and he must be or he wouldn't do it. The truth is, I'm thrilled to go out and do it. I'm thrilled to be on stage, and there's a lot of ego in that. I get it. I'm not pretending that, there's not bravado. I see other people on stage, and I want that to be me. That's just what it is. And even with TV, we all have, an ego enough to do what we do. So I get it. I just try to keep it, I hope, in check. I hope I'm not a jerk to people and that they see me as approachable because I'm nobody. I'm a Youper kid, that is just cannot believe the stuff that I've been able to do. And if I have any greatest productions, it's my 3 kids, and that's where I'm proudest. I've done some neat stuff, but to have a daughter that's in medicine that helps people with strokes, she's a PA, and to have a son that's in Hollywood making videos and made a huge internet career. If you want to look up Titanic Sinclair, and you'll see poor kid's been on TMZ too. And then my son Alex is huge into preservation in Saginaw. He single-handedly saved a house from being demolished, and he went to City Hall and fought for it, and now he's in there plastering walls and put his money where his mouth is, bought a house in downtown Saginaw, and he's a videographer too. So to have 2 boys in video and a daughter in medicine, that is hands down the greatest things I've ever done. And now to be a grandpa with 2 little grandbabies, that makes me happier than any shipwreck I've ever been on.
Well, Rick, your kids had a good example, I think. There's a lot that you've done. And I know we're running up on the end of our time, and I wanted to get in a couple of things some housekeeping things. We are going to do this again, and we have for our next show one of the really the most interesting younger people in our community who's doing some just fantastic work. Many of you have seen him posting on our site. You've seen his work all over the community on his Blue Eyes Below page. We are going to have Dusty Cliffman on the show.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah. And his work with ROVs, his work with just that stunning thing where he has the drone looking down at his boat over the shipwrecks. Wow. Just an amazing view. And Dusty has done some amazing stuff. Really smart, really enthused guy who, I'm really excited to show his work and to highlight the things he does.
We've already used him on PBS too, Brendan. His aerials of the Big Sable Lighthouse and his underwater video of the crane that was tied to Muskegon. It's again another young person who's coming up, and it gives me great satisfaction that the history is in good hands for so many people that are coming up. And to think of the people you can have on your show, that list is endless. I think of artists that do stuff, and my God, there's so many cool things that you could do. I'm thrilled for you.
Well, part of the problem is the technology, right? Mm-hmm. This ain't easy to do. Rick found that out the hard way. There's a lot of guys who I thought, yeah, boy, I'd like to have him on. And I think, yeah, I don't know if he could get in. Where there's some technical hurdles, and so unless you're pretty computer literate, it can be difficult. But I want to make that easier so I can get people on and make it a little bit more turnkey. So watch for the posting about Dusty coming on, and it's going to be within the next, I think, the next 2 weeks, 2 weeks from tonight, if I'm not mistaken. But there'll be a regular event made on the website. And again, I just want to thank everybody for attending our show tonight. It was really, really great to have everybody, chatting in the background and watch those messages coming across. I apologize if I didn't get to your questions. There were a lot coming through. I tried to get to as many as I could. And again, thanks to everybody for making our community such a success. It just astounds me that we just broke the 700 mark tonight while we were talking. 700 subscribers to this group, and it's only a few months old. So feel free to post material, Great Lakes Shipwreck related. Obviously, it's the Great Lakes Shipwreck research groups. We're kind of more focused on new information as opposed to like your dive video or things like that. But if you want to contribute and you think you have something new or interesting to say, please do post and participate in our community. So, Rick, any parting words before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, and that's the fact that if we're not getting paid, the one thing you can do is to share this information with other people. And literally, it's not for ego. It's to prove to, especially for PBS, if you like seeing shipwreck stuff on PBS or on their website, greatlakesnow.org, if you like seeing that, support it. Put a comment. They read it. And if they see the support that I know exists out there for these shipwrecks, they will continue to do it. If you don't do it and you don't like maybe a picture you see from Brendan, after a while you kind of say, well, then why am I doing this? If it doesn't get shared a lot, again, it's not super ego. I mean, yeah, it's nice to wake up and have 50 comments on something. Don't get me wrong. But the truth is, it's a lot of work to do little vignettes, videos, and to do stuff. So if you share those with, a couple of people and they share it and it gets around, then I think the mission is there. So there's no subscription fee for anything that we're doing, except if you don't share it, it'll go away. I guarantee you that if my boss thinks I'm better served at, doing green algae in Lake Erie, then that's where I'm going to go. And that's truthfully not really where I want to go. I would love to share, so much from my archive and so many stories I haven't uncovered. And the only way to do that is if you comment and you start showing that you enjoy these things, especially on the PBS pages, and call your affiliate. Local affiliates say, I want to see Great Lakes Now on here. They hear that, it grows, it becomes a permanent fixture if you fight for it. And that's the same with museums too, Brendan. If you don't go to the museum ships, we've seen Sundew vanished. Bramble is a classic example of a cool historic ship that was out for the Morel search and circumnavigated really our planet. It went away. So if we don't support our libraries and our museums the same way, and that goes with your time going in there and your financial support too, they will disappear. And it's a fight we all have to do.
Excellent points, Rick. Very, very well stated. Please do support your local maritime history organizations and hit the museums, join a society, be as active as you can be because one of the things we know is that a lot of the people our age are sort of passing on, and the museum attendance is down. And so let's be as supportive as we can be. So good parting words, Rick. Thanks for sharing them. And thank you again, Rick, for joining us. And thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight to join us. This will still be online, I think, so I think you can rewatch it. You can watch it if you missed it.
Perfect. Yeah, I'd love to share it with people too.
Excellent. Feel free to join us in a couple of weeks for Dusty's.
I'll be there. I guarantee it.
Going to be a whole lot of fun. So thanks, everybody, and have a good night. Good night, Rick.
Good night.